Sanders in 1998.
This should be way higher because when Barry walks away, you know he's got more football left in the tank. You are dying to see more Barry Sanders highlights.
That was unbelievable.
Here's how good Barry Sanders was in his last season. He had over 1,400 yards, 7 touchdowns, and it was considered a down season for him.
How about that? 73 yards for Barry Sanders.
His last season, to me, it doesn't matter what the yardage was. It was no different than any previous season. He was as good as there was and always had highlight runs, more so than probably any back in the league.
Barry again off the right side, bites 3! He's on his way!
It was so cool to see the things that he could do, and it was a bummer to see him go. He was one of those special players that just you couldn't not love to watch.
Had he come back, you know he's cracking 1,000 yards, and he's probably got 3 or 4 productive years left in him.
We don't have footage of his decline. You know, we don't have those games where he lost a step and wasn't the great Barry Sanders. He leaves behind just a highlight reel.
When God created Barry Sanders, even he didn't know what he made.
For me as a football fan, I was disappointed because I was like, man, this is the last we're going to see of Barry Sanders. I'm not going to get to watch this anymore. We've never seen anybody like Barry Sanders this day and age.
Because watching him run, whether you a Lions fan or not, it was like a symphony orchestra on a football field. The way he could break you down, it was like poetry in motion.
Like the way he was able to move was just superhuman. Like nobody else could shift like that.
If you could take one of the best defenders in the league and make them look silly, he deserves to be on this list.
Folks, he's the best in the business. Someday you'll be able to say, I saw the best running back in football, ever.
He's good at 10. Because of that, oh, well, we didn't know this was going to happen.
Barry Sanders was the only player in NFL history to Irish goodbye in his career. I mean, he just left.
Barry Sanders is less of a farewell season and more of a, wait, you're not really, no, come back season.
One of the more disappointing exits in the NFL.
The number 9 career finale of all time, Tiki Barber in 2006.
It's that simple. I mean, Tiki Barber's 2006 season is ridiculous.
That's just a bigger, better athlete. What a run by Tiki! He's having an all-pro day!
What Tiki Barber did on the back end of his career is almost Hall of Fame stuff. When you take a look at the numbers, he was breaking every Giant rushing record, and he was doing stuff that no one in the league was doing.
Only one they got is Tiki. We got to stop Tiki up front. Yeah. You see they trying to get him the ball every play.
You look at the last 4 years of his career, you could put him up against any 4 years of any running back, period. When you talk about yards from scrimmage, overall productivity, it's insane. I think he absolutely deserves to be on the list.
Keep an eye out. We're going to have heavy doses of running the ball, so keep an eye out.
In his final season, our number 9 player gained over 2,100 yards from scrimmage.
Holy cow, are you kidding me? He went for 2,100 yards?
That's right, Chris. 2,127 yards to be exact. A stat that makes you wonder, what if Tiki waited a few more years to say farewell?
It felt like when he left, he still had his best years ahead of him.
What could have 07 been if he did play? You know, he still had some juice.
He had rushed for 5 straight 1,000-yard seasons and was great out of the backfield as well, catching passes. So to retire then was so weird.
You always wonder if he did stay for another year or two and kept up with those numbers and won a championship, if we'd be talking about Tiki Barber for the Hall of Fame right now.
In his last regular season game, Tiki decides, I want to get one more crack at the playoffs. So he puts the other 21 Giants on his back.
Tiki runs out of a tackle. Tiki across midfield.
And runs for 230-plus yards and scores 3 touchdowns.
Touchdown, Tiki Barber!
I mean, you could just look and see every single Giant, all 52 other players and coaches on this guy's back as he's carrying the ball and dragging Redskins tacklers along with him.
He dominated that game, and he single-handedly, from an offensive standpoint, put the team in the playoffs.
Tiki and the Giants seemed like a match made in heaven, but a brutal breakup kept Barber from being higher on our list.
I think it's because of the way his relationship with Tom Coughlin kind of ended. The contention that wasn't really hidden very well. It came out into the media.
You could start to feel the separation from Tiki Barber and his teammates and the organization.
Making matters worse, Tiki's mouth turned him into public enemy number one in the Big Apple.
NBC, Dick Ebersol hired me to give my true opinions about what I believe is happening in the locker room. I've told this to Eli himself. You need to be a strong leader.
So you don't think you were ratting out a former teammate?
I wasn't ratting out. And the intent of that comment was not to harm.
You kind of distance yourself from the team the last half of the season, yet you feel like you can speak freely about this locker room and how it was.
Every person in New York was like, get lost, give us Rondé. Get the out of here, Tiki.
Whether you love him or hate him, Tiki Barber had one of the most productive final seasons in NFL history.
He was phenomenal. I don't know if people really realize how good he was in the prime of his career. He's definitely one of the best backs in football.
Tiki was a great player. Could even throw the word transcendent for that little period. Greatness. He was special.
The number 8 career finale of all time, Jerome Brown in 1991.
Number 8. It's never easy to talk about a career that tragically ended too soon. Jerome Brown passed away in 1992, leaving behind a legacy of a big personality and a fearsome defender.
Jerome Brown is one of the best defensive linemen we never talk about.
Jerome Brown making the stop.
I mean, it was impossible to block him with one person.
Tremendous defensive play by Jerome Brown.
And Jerome Brown, despite his body type, had unbelievable quickness and athleticism.
Jerome just beat the center and got straight through the field.
We were taking a whooping. And I remember looking in the eyes of some of the guys that were responsible for blocking Jerome Brown. Jerome Brown put fear in football players.
When you come out backyard and you try to start something, you always get your butt kicked.
Jerome Brown was part of a dynamic defense.
The Eagles are having them for lunch and dinner and maybe the snack on the plane flying home.
A defense that led the NFL in all categories.
They were ranked number one, passing, rushing, and overall.
How about this Eagles defense?
He had 9 sacks, which for a defensive tackle is a lot.
Bateman steps up, and then he takes a hit, and down he goes, sacked by Jerome Brown.
That was his best season as an all-around player. You saw a higher level of maturity, a greater level of commitment.
And who said I don't work in the offseason? Took me 4 years, but I learned.
And you combine that with the physical talent that he had, and you have a guy that was as good a defensive tackle as there was in football.
Brown's 9 sacks in his final season put him among the NFL's best defensive tackles. But why is he only ranked at number 8 on our list?
When I think of that team, I think of Reggie White, though. I actually don't think of Jerome Brown.
Reggie White was a defensive end. He was pretty good. Reggie White is arguably the best defensive end to ever play. But some believe that Jerome Brown was on his way to being a Hall of Fame type player if he was able to play 10 years in the league.
The best way I could describe it is Jerome Brown as a South magnet and Reggie White as a North magnet. And they just attracted themselves to quarterbacks.
The one thing we will always have here is our memories of Jerome Brown.
It was almost like a loss of innocence for a lot of us, because we had a young ball player that we thought was going to be with us for years, and just like that, he was gone.
You could tell what tragedy and devastation it was to that team emotionally the entire year, and I don't think they ever recovered.
His memories will be here forever. And let's make sure that throughout this season, that this whole stadium rocks loud enough where Jerome Brown can hear us.
I think that the history of the Eagles in the 90s is different had Jerome Brown survived.
The number 7 career finale of all time, Hutson in 1945.
He's one of the great players of all time. I mean, if younger fans don't know who he is, they should.
Don Hutson, one of the fastest men in pro football.
And I don't know that the NFL has seen a guy that has been as dominant in his era at his position as Don Hutson was.
I don't think there's any way to really understand how good Don Hutson was. Whenever you see Don Hutson footage, it's him on a practice field in super slow-mo. So he's just...
He should be on this list because NFL receivers have him to thank for paving the way for all of them. And by paving the way, we make roads in this country. He made routes.
The idea of the term yards after the catch, which we use today all the time, Don Hutson was the first guy that really kind of gave you real yards after the catch.
Don's blazing speed made him hard to cover.
He had tremendous hands and a great sense of the passing game.
Watch him take a long throw, good for 6 points.
He had 488 career catches, 99 touchdowns. You're talking about Babe Ruth, Wayne Gretzky kind of domination. His 10th season, his final season, was one of his best.
Don Hutson had 47 catches for 834 yards and 9 touchdowns in 1945 and led the league in receptions for the 8th time in 10 seasons.
He ends up retiring as the all-time leading touchdown receiver in NFL history. And it takes nearly 50 years to break that record.
Number 100! And that long pursuit of Don Hutson's career touchdown reception is over.
I would not be surprised if he had something to do with being a groundskeeper because the guy did everything.
There's a reason his name is on the practice field in Green Bay because I think he was practicing 5 hours a day. He led the NFL in receptions, and he also had 4 interceptions. His ability to excel in all 3 phases of the game is really unprecedented.
He was a kicker as well. How is it possible? Nobody even remembers this dude.
In the signature game of our number 7 career finale, Hutson set a record that will likely never be broken by any other receiver.
Don Hutson scored 4 touchdowns and kicked 5 extra points.
So he's scoring the touchdowns, and then he's lining up to kick the extra points after that, and that all comes in the second quarter. Name me a receiver that's doing that today.
Don Hutson was going to come back for one more season. He demanded $15,000 a year. Don Hutson wanted Sammy Ball money. Curly Lambeau was having none of that. And when Don Hutson goes, that's the end of those great Packers teams of that era. That might be the first example in history of a position player demanding quarterback money. It's one more way that Don Hutson was a pioneer.
The number 6 career finale of all time, Kurt Warner in 2009.
Nowadays in this era, we have all sorts of great late 30s quarterbacks. Drew Brees, Tom Brady, Peyton Manning was good in his late 30s. But to see what Kurt Warner was doing in 2009, he was really the first one in this era to start being that good that late in his career.
That guy could still be playing, I think. I mean, he was special. Look at the numbers in the final season.
Kurt Warner's final season was special, becoming the first player to ever throw for over 14,000 yards for 2 teams.
Oh, what a throw by Graybeard, Kurt Warner.
He also threw his 200th touchdown pass.
Touchdown, Cardinals!
And anchored one of the most memorable playoff wins in NFL history, a game where he had more touchdowns than incompletions.
That performance in that game against the Packers, to go out there and do that at that stage of his career, it's just amazing.
I mean, that's a great way to walk out with those numbers, that's for sure.
Here we go. Good job.
Here is a champion, a high caliber player, and he proves that he still belongs in that conversation.
Kurt is unbelievable. It's like watching Madden. I mean, it's unbelievable. What's up? If he's on, he's on. But if he's off, if you don't pressure him, Lord, we don't pressure him, he's on.
You would not have thought in 2009 Kurt Warner is going to be walking away at the top of his game after having one of his best seasons.
Hey, great job. It's the way to operate.
During our 6th best career finale, Warner led the Cardinals to their first 10-win season in 30 years, placing a rightful cap on his Hall of Fame career.
Warner looks deep, far side, Fitz is there!
He has been absolutely on fire like I've never seen him on fire.
Even though he was 38, even though he didn't win a Super Bowl with the Cardinals, I mean, he really was going out on top.
He was amazing, there's no doubt. Kurt Warner is definitely an NFL legend.
Number 5 career finale of all time. John Elway in 1998.
Oh, only number 5.
Who the hell did you have ahead of him?
He's got to be higher up on the list.
I don't even know what the rest of your list is, but why is he not number 1?
Elway deserves to be number 1.
You guys have done criminality to John Elway.
Oh, no.
It's completely unfair.
If you told me somebody else was number 1 on the list, I would probably get physical.
Let's go. We got a chance for a big one.
I think you're a little low. I mean, but I'm really biased. He's the statue of David of quarterbacks. What a glorious sight to behold. You design what a quarterback's supposed to look like. It's supposed to have the legs and arm and mind of John Elway. He was perfect in every way.
Well, maybe not perfect, at least in his final season. Age and injury took their toll as John Elway missed 4 starts in 1998.
Here's why I think he's good at number 5. Elway didn't do it by himself. He had a lot of help.
Terrell Davis is there, and he is very strong and doing things very dope.
Terrell breaks a tackle. He's got it. There it is. Terrell Davis, 2,000 yards in a single season.
In his last season, our number 5 player had a 93.0 passer rating, the highest of his career, to go along with 2,806 passing yards and 22 touchdowns. But the only number that mattered was the one that put Elway on this list, 33, as in Super Bowl 33. Although everyone remembers the previous championship.
He dives inside the 5-yard line.
Elway was MVP of Super Bowl 33, the climax of his Hall of Fame career.
He had a much better statistical game in the 1998 Super Bowl.
His last game ever, he's thrown a deep bomb to Rod Smith for a 70-something yard touchdown down the middle on a post.
Elway boots and rolls to his right, stops, loads it up, throws down deep the middle of the field.
He threw for 336 yards and a score to win his 2nd straight championship.
Denver touchdown.
He had that slow motion touchdown run that probably is still running on a loop in the lobby in Canton.
Elway with a big smile on his face, and why not?
That's a pretty good exclamation point.
The MVP of Super Bowl 33 is John Elway.
He hadn't announced it. We all kind of had a sense, but it was pretty clear that he was saying goodbye.
It was never an issue that he wanted to keep playing. I think what happened was, and he knew it, that his body could not keep playing.
I'll never be able to fill the void of playing a football game on Sunday afternoon. We all graduated from high school. We graduated from college. I'm just graduating from pro football.
Elway's last season wasn't the only iconic finale in 1998.
We're going to talk Elway versus Seinfeld now.
Seinfeld was over, and a show about nothing should never end. It should be like the never-ending story. Have you seen this with Atreyu, and then the big puppy is flying around? Jonathan Elway, he was so cool, and hey guys, sling, sling, toss, toss. And then I win, and then he leaves as he wins. He had to tie of 2 sassy things.
I like the last episode. I don't think you could argue that it's the greatest episode. Did Seinfeld win the Emmy that year? No. Elway is the only one that went out on top. That's the clear winner to me.
Number 4 career finale of all time. Norm Van Brocklin in 1960.
That's good. That's a good spot. He deserves to be in the top 5.
The Eagles' fearless pigskin pitcher is red hot, and so are the rest of the Eagles.
I like Van Brocklin's story, but he can't be ahead of Elway.
I might actually put it higher.
As much as I like Norm Van Brocklin, the passing numbers back then are not nearly the same.
That season, Van Brocklin was so much greater than the numbers. If you look at his stats, 24 touchdown passes, you say, well, that's pretty good. But that doesn't even begin to tell the story. I mean, that team would not have been anywhere near a championship without Norm Van Brocklin.
I believe he was MVP of the league in 1960.
The fabulous Dutchman Norm Van Brocklin earned the league's Most Valuable Player award.
Norm Van Brocklin should be considered one of Philadelphia's greats. The Eagles were 10-2 in 1960, career high 24 touchdowns, and the fact that he was able to go out on top is really incredible.
The great Eagle passer, Norm Van Brocklin, has something cooking. It's a gone goose to Tommy McDonald for 33 yards and the touchdown.
Eagles receivers, Tommy McDonald, Pete Retzlaff, they average over 18 yards per reception. The Dutchman is throwing the ball downfield. It's one of the most explosive offenses of that era.
Norm Van Brocklin hits Pete Retzlaff with a quick pass. Norm's precise pitch is an early indication of what's to follow.
Van Brocklin told you before the year began that this was going to be my last year. The whole team played with that awareness during the season that this is it for Dutch. They knew how much he wanted to go out a champion. When he got to that game that day, the opponent almost didn't matter.
You win the title, and I always say this, but who did you have to beat to do it?
This is a team that beats the Vince Lombardi Packers.
What the hell's going on out here?
No one beats the Vince Lombardi Packers in championship games. This is the team that does it in 1960.
They were behind in the fourth quarter. They got down inside the 10-yard line. They called one play in the huddle, and they were walking up to the line of scrimmage, and Van Brocklin changes the play. To this day, none of the players know exactly what he saw, but there was something that Van Brocklin felt that the play right now is a sweep to Ted Dean, who was a rookie halfback who hadn't scored a rushing touchdown all year, and that's the play that won the game.
The Philadelphia Eagles have won the World Championship of Professional Football.
They are the only squad to beat a Vince Lombardi team in the playoffs, and they have still yet to hoist the Vince Lombardi trophy. Illuminati, I'm just saying.
The game's Outstanding Player Award goes to Norm Van Brocklin, who is retiring as an active player after today's game.
Norm Van Brocklin wants to get into coaching. The Eagles wanted him to be a player coach. He was a cantankerous SOB. You come to him and say, we want you to be a player coach, he's going to laugh in your face and move on.
Norm Van Brocklin spent 13 years as head coach of the Vikings and Falcons.
Damn it, Eder, wake up! Like a zombie out there.
But his impact as a player in Philadelphia can't be overstated.
The Eagles had been a doormat for many years before that, and they would be a doormat for many years after that. Norm Van Brocklin's departure means the end of an era.
The number 3 career finale of all time, Sterling Sharpe in 1994.
Hi there. See if we can get you guys excited today.
Sterling Sharpe was kind of the reason to watch when there wasn't a reason to watch the Packers.
Touchdown, Sterling Sharpe! Sterling Sharpe, what a catch! Touchdown. Guess who?
He was unguardable. He was just so big and physical, but yet he could go up and get it. He was a good athlete as well.
Freak show. I think you talk about some of the NFL legends, like he's a guy that I look at and go, he's like 10 years before his time.
Sterling Sharpe! My goodness!
He was a transcendent player, obscured by Jerry Rice, who's the greatest of all time, but he was so good with the ball in the air. Fearless.
You have to admire the guts there.
Fast.
He busts out of there and shows that burst.
Tough. And believed he could not be stopped and was often right.
That was another sterling performance.
That is big time.
Let's go, baby. That's just big time.
Our number 3 selection had a big-time career finale, catching 94 passes for more than 1,100 yards and 18 touchdowns.
Touchdown, Sterling Sharpe!
But in 1994, a neck injury ended his promising career.
When he stepped away, I remember it hurt us. It hurt all Packer fans. We were like, no, not Sterling.
To go out and even with the neck injury, have over 1,000 yards, it really speaks to his greatness.
Could you imagine that Packers offense with Brett Favre and the other receivers, and then add Sterling Sharpe in those years where they went back-to-back Super Bowls and were deep into the playoffs every year? The Packers would have won more Super Bowls.
If he continued to be the force he was, as Brett Favre got better, I think you're looking at something that bordered on almost Montana and Rice.
Back to throw is far.
To the corner. Touchdown. Sterling Sharpe.
If Sterling Sharpe had stayed healthy, he and Brett Favre would have been the Rolling Stones.
Always the best for you, man. Get back to where you special surgery when you go through it. There you go.
It stinks on ice that it was his farewell season, because this is another guy who had so much talent and so much promise. You only think, what could have been?
The number 2 career finale of all time, Roger Staubach in 1979.
If the bitter will to win was rolled into one bundle and set on legs, it would look like Roger Staubach. This season, Roger won a 4th NFL passing championship, making him the all-time quarterback leader.
Staubach, he was always so good at timing, and now he knew exactly when to go out because he really went out on top. Cowboys 11-5, he made the Pro Bowl in his last season, 27 touchdowns.
Staubach threw the football as well as he's ever thrown in his life.
Roger Staubach's final season was a phenomenal season because that was in an era when 27 touchdowns and 3,500 passing yards were high numbers.
Roger going deep for Drew down the sideline. Touchdown, Dallas Cowboys.
He led the league in passer rating, had the most yards of his career. He was only 37 years old, so you go, why didn't he play another year? Based on what he did in his final season of 1979.
The final regular season game of our number 2 player's career was one for the ages.
Everything about that final game was just sort of vintage Roger Staubach.
How can you live like this doing this every week?
This is what it's all about.
And that was against the Washington Redskins, and they trailed late in the 4th quarter.
42 seconds left in the game. Redskins lead by 6.
And he directed a comeback that kind of defined his career.
Staubach throwing in the end zone. Tony Hill! Touchdown! Tony Hill!
It was a great way to go out, one of the greatest comebacks in team history.
This was definitely one of the guys that left you wanting more when he retired.
To have that kind of season at the end, after all the beatings he took. Nowadays, there's a flag. That would have been a flag. That's definitely a flag.
How long can you take that until it starts to pay a price on you?
He was only 37, but in that day and age, 37 was ancient. Today, not so much.
When he had that final press conference at Texas Stadium, he looks like he can absolutely still play. He still looks the part of Captain America.
Holy cow, I can't believe this.
Roger Staubach's farewell press conference was televised on 3 TV networks, was broadcast live on 3 radio stations, and was attended by 200 newspapers.
I thank the Cowboys, and I'm retired.
That's a farewell.
Good luck to you all.
Thanks, bud.
Sometimes you look at the greatness of the player, the impact of the player, and the circumstances by which they decided to say goodbye to the game. He was Roger Staubach, and he was an influential individual, and he was a symbol of the sport and the nation in that time. I think this absolutely belongs.
The number 1 career finale of all time, Jim Brown in 1965.
You guys nailed this, because Jim Brown walking off into the sunset after rushing for 1,500 yards, a year plus removed from winning an NFL championship for Cleveland, is the ultimate leave you wanting more.
I mean, you're at the top of your game. You lead the National Football League in rushing again. That has got to be the greatest final season of all time.
He was arguably the greatest football player ever, who had no drop-off in his game. You look at his 1965 season, it's right up there with his best years. Who's got a better walk-off season than that?
That's the champion of the world quitting after he's 50-0, if he's a fighter. That's what that is. He was the greatest quit on top.
But clearly, he left a lot on the table in the National Football League. But yet, in the less than a decade that he was there, I think people can still say, and rightfully so, he was the greatest running back to ever play in the history of the National Football League.
Now the game is in the hands of the men. Men like Jim Brown, the greatest running back of all time.
I do think he's the greatest player that's ever played. regardless of position.
He was just better than the guys he was playing against.
Jim Brown could have been great for 4 or 5 more years. I mean, he dominated.
Just the way he was running, the way he was beating guys, the way he was running them over or running around them, whatever he wanted to do, he could do. He was still at his physical peak in 1965.
In 1965, Brown led the NFL in rushing for the 8th time. Here is Brown at his battering best, driving headlong into a knot of tacklers.
I mean, MVP of the league, best player in the league, greatest player ever, playing in a championship game his last game. Come on. Awesome stuff.
At 29 years young, Jim Brown led the NFL in rushing yards and touchdowns, finishing with more than 1,500 yards on the ground and 17 scores. But the greatest player to ever play the game left us surprised and wanted just a little more.
The freaking Cleveland Browns, freaking Hollywood, freaking everybody robbed us of 5 more great seasons and highlights of Jim Brown.
I mean, it was shocking when we got the news that he was walking away from football. I mean, nobody saw that coming.
My original intention was to try and participate in the 1966 National Football League season, but due to circumstances, this is impossible.
He simply got into a financial dispute with ownership and decided, I can go do other things. I'm done playing football, but it's a great farewell season, but it probably shouldn't have been a farewell season.
With no football encore in sight, Brown took his talents to Hollywood, becoming a rising star in the movie industry, which lasted for 4 decades.
I don't think there's going to be a Jim Brown Film Festival at Cannes anytime soon, but I thought he was a pretty good actor.
I'd like to report a murder. Highland View Apartments, 433 West 3rd Street. Me? Just a friend.
Whether being the leading man on the big screen or starring on the football field, there is no doubt that Jim Brown left a profound legacy as the very best at everything he did.
Jim Brown walked off the field in his last game in 1965 as the best athlete on the field.
Not that many people can walk away at the very top. Jim Brown walked away at the very top.
But on that football field, he was a force to be reckoned with. And to play the game like the game should have been played.